Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Tim Wendel to discuss his new novel, Escape from Castro's Cuba. Tim Wendel is the acclaimed author of 14 books, including Castro's Curveball and Summer of '68, the season that changed baseball and America forever. He is a founding editor of USA Today Baseball Weekly and a writer in residence at Johns Hopkins University. His stories and columns have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, National Geographic, Psychology Today, and Esquire. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Saul Wisnia. Saul has authored or co-authored numerous books, including Son of Havana, A Baseball Journey from Cuba to the Big Leagues and Back, and Miracle at Fenway. A former sports and news correspondent at the Washington Post and feature writer at the Boston Herald, his writing has appeared in Sports Illustrated, the Boston Globe, and Boston Magazine. Saul co-chairs the Boston chapter of the Society of American Baseball Research and blogs When Time Allows. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. And you can order your copy of Escape from Castro's Cuba from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello.
Christina, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? Excited about this conversation.
Hi, Christina.
Hello.
Thanks for having me along. Looking very forward to this evening. And thank you for that introduction very much, Christina. You did fail to mention one very important thing about Tim Wendel, that he's a graduate of the same sports writing and literary producing powerhouse as myself, Syracuse University. And we were joking in the green room about the fact that while we were both disappointed that Syracuse lost in the Sweet 16 basketball tournament the other night, it saved us from the dilemma of having their next game, which would have been tipping off in about 8 minutes from right now. And I think we both would have been probably staring away from our interview and over to the TV screen. So we don't have to worry about that. So we can.
You would have been all by yourself, so.
You know. Yeah. So now we can just talk about Cuba and baseball, which is wonderful. And I will say that I've always been a fan of Tim's work for a long time, and I loved Castro's Curveball when it came out, and was so glad to see that Billy Bryan was making a return trip to Cuba. I'm gonna, for those who haven't read the book, I'm just gonna read the summary on the back here. Because I don't want to ruin the story for anybody who hasn't read it yet, and you all should, or at least maybe hasn't finished it. This is a visionary sequel to Castro's Curveball. The former Washington Senators minor league catcher has returned to Havana with a small role in a movie being filmed on location. Billy Bryan soon realizes that this place and his past remain as star-crossed as when he played winter ball in the Cuban capital decades before. Against his better judgment, Billy becomes entangled in a scheme to spirit a top baseball prospect off the island. This pits him against his old friend, Fidel Castro. Despite being in his final days, the dictator remains a dangerous adversary, as does the Cuban sports machine and the Mexican crime syndicates that now direct baseball talent toward the U.S. major leagues. In Escape from Castro's Cuba, Billy must once again navigate the cross currents of the so-called City of Columns, or the City of Columns, right?
City of Columns.
Yep, a place where the sunsets from the Hotel Nacional along the I'm going to mispronounce this, Melicon breakwater are as beautiful as ever, but where the alleyways in old Havana will still fan out, crooked and broken, like an old catcher's fingers. Wow. That really gets you. And that's a perfect lead-in to the first question I want to ask you tonight, Tim. You've now written 2 baseball novels set in Cuba, and I've heard you speak of the love you have for Havana and the entire island. Can you tell us about your first visit to Cuba and what caused this love affair you have with the island and your urge to write about it?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to, Saul. And thank you for the introduction. And thanks, Christina and Mitchell, too, for having us. I came to Cuba, and I think this happens sometimes in life. It's things sneak up on you. And my first trip to Cuba was 1991. I went down to cover a series of exhibition games between Team Cuba and Team USA before the Barcelona Summer Games. And we were out on the eastern end of the island, out in Old Guin, actually where Castro originated from. And I thought I knew everything about baseball. You know, I just covered the World Series. The Minnesota Twins had beaten the Atlanta Braves, an epic World Series, etc. And nothing prepared me for Cuba. The level of play, how well the game is played. And in that very first game, they didn't have a press box, which I like. You know, you kind of sit down in the crowd. And I was on the end, and we had this kind of who's who of kind of American sports writers with Cuban connections. Dan Le Batard was there, Bill Brubaker, then with the Washington Post. And I was the guy on the end of this row of like 10 people, Howard French from AP. And this older gentleman kind of came in the middle of the game, came up and sat down next to me in the aisle. And he said, "Tell me about the 1991 Minnesota Twins." And I kind of went into my sports talk radio thing, which I probably am doing a little bit too much right now, and started saying it's going to be difficult for them to repeat. They don't have deep pockets, you know, et cetera. And he cut me off. He said, "I know all that." I went, "Oh, what do you need to know?" And he said, "I need to know what they look like." And I went, "Oh, this is going to be interesting." And I started going around the diamond. People remember that epic 91 team, Ken Herbeck at first base. I put Jack Morris on the mound, of course. And my Spanish is still terrible. It was worse back then. And so the other guys are helping me kind of describe, you know, these players. And I'm finishing with Kirby Puckett in center field, who is difficult enough to describe in English, let alone my broken Spanish or some kind of combination thereof. And I'm doing so, I'm looking out at the field, just trying to pull in things, and people are trying to help me. And so I'm done. I've gone around the diamond. And I turned to the old man and said, "There you go. There's your 1991 World Series champions." And he stood up and he hit me on the shoulder, and he started to have tears going down his face.
Wow.
And I went, "Oh my, we're in a totally different world." And my friends like to tease me sometimes. They say Hemingway had the old man in the sea, you had the old man in the ballpark. And that's what kind of started the whole path.
Wow. Yeah, that really talks about both the love that people have for the sport, but also the fact that it's so hard for them to get the games. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember a story that Louis Tiant told me about his mom watching him on the game of the week and crying and reaching out to touch the screen because she wanted to touch her son, who, of course, she was separated from, you know, by the ocean. Well, obviously, many folks in the audience tonight know that there are a lot of great Cuban major leaguers through the years. You know, guys like Tony Perez, Tony Oliva, of course, right up to the current MVP, Jose Abreu, and my friend Louis Tiant. I mean, all these guys are Cuban, and there are many more. You touched on it there, but can you talk about the special relationship that Cubans have for what is traditionally known as well, at least in the old days, as America's pastime? I mean, why do Cubans love the game so much, and what does it represent to them?
Well, I think you certainly discovered this in your great book, Son of Havana, with Louis. It's a game for the Cubans that goes back almost as far as it does in this country, you know, well over a century. And they're passionate about it. But there's also a difference, I think a key difference. Here, baseball, and I think we're going to get into this later, you know, the future might be a little bit shaky because it's seen as too set in its ways, too much mom and apple pie and 4th of July. Down in Havana and in Cuba, even though it dates back so far, it was the game of an independent nation. It's like if you wanted to draw a line in the sand, you didn't do other sports. You certainly didn't go to the bullfights way back when. You went out and played this radical new game called baseball. And one of the things, you know, we're going to probably touch on Castro and, the evil that he's done. But one of the ways he ingratiated himself to the population is after he took power in 59. One of the first things he did is he barnstormed around the island. He formed this team called Los Barbaros, the bearded ones. And of course, Castro had the pitch, being the ego guy, driven guy he was. They had Che Crivera for a while at second base. Supposedly he was terrible. But the thing is the fact that they went around the island and played this game, baseball, that the people loved so much, endeared them, at least initially, so much to the population. That's how tight the ties are and how deep the threads go.
I wonder what would happen if Shea made an error, or the scorer gave him an error. I wouldn't want to be in that press box. So we did talk about Castro's Curveball, coming out in 1999. So here we are over 20 years later. Why did you wait 2 decades to return to the story of Billy Bryan and Fidel Castro? And did you initially think you weren't going to do a second book?
Yeah, I thought it was done pretty much with Cuba after Curveball. I did a short novella called Havana Libre, which was fun to do. But then I took, I've made 4 trips to the island. The last one was in early 2017, actually soon after Donald Trump was elected president, before the inauguration. And we went down, and again, Cuba's got this way of reaching out to me and saying, hey, pay attention. And we had landed actually on a Southwest Airlines flight from Baltimore, Washington Airport, which I still find mind-boggling. And we had landed, and they didn't have a big enough ramp, so we came down the stairs. We're walking across the tarmac, and this guy saddles in next to me, and we haven't even cleared customs yet. And he saddles in next to me, and he says, call me Ricky. And they're, okay, hi, Ricky. Now, I never told him my name, and it's actually been well over 8 years since I've been down there. And we're still walking along. I've got my wife with me, her first trip to Cuba, so I'm a little bit on edge. And then Ricky goes, what brings you back to Cuba again, Senior Wendell? And I'm going, oh my gosh, I haven't cleared customs, and I know I'm back. And that started this whole very strange trip where we were followed for a while. We had a very interesting conversation at the U.S. intersection, now the embassy. And then what blew me away was how much, in a sense, the baseball world had changed. You could tell Castro was on his, had died. So in a sense, the sports machine's percolating down. But more importantly, the crime syndicates were spiriting top players off the islands on cigarette boats, which is far, far different than, say, when El Duque Hernandez and others came off on rafts. So that's what really turned my head. That and trying to stay away from Ricky as much as I could.
Yeah, I was going to say, what happened to Ricky?
I don't know. I love Ricky in the dust after a while.
Wow. So you felt like you had to make that return trip with Billy.
Yeah.
After seeing that. Yeah.
But then there was this period of trepidation, and I know some people were asking some questions about this. Going my good friend David Rowell. It's been a while since I've written about Billy and Evangelina and Chuck Cochran and all these guys. And at first I was worried, seriously worried if they were going to talk to me anymore. It hasn't been a while. It's been a long time. And Billy doesn't hold a grudge that much, but he did a little bit. Our first couple of conversations where I'm kind of reaching out to him. And yes, I do have talks and conversations with my characters, which is a great way to get writing time. People just think you're going crazy. They leave you alone in the coffee shop where you sit there and go, Billy, what have you been doing for 20 years? And but after a while, he warmed up, and I just love Billy as a character. In some ways, he's what I want to grow up to be when I get older, I guess.
Yeah. No, he is a very, very likable character, not always the narrator, but just a great protagonist, and I think you've aged him well. So your own love of baseball, which comes through in these books and others you've done, books like of course Down to the Last Pitch, Summer of '68, which actually my friend Louis figures prominently in. Yes, also High Heat. I mean, and of course all your work in the different places along the way, USA Today and others. What drew you to a love of baseball, both as a kid and then as a writer? Why did you feel compelled to write about it, and why do you think it does draw in so much great writing?
I think in a lot of ways, Saul, first of all, I grew up a baseball fan. I played Little League. Maybe one reason we called the first one Curveball is I couldn't hit a curveball to save my life. So, you got to work that in a different way. But so I always enjoyed the game. But then when I got, I went into sports writing, certainly coming out of college and such, what always kind of drew me to baseball in a lot of ways, and I think it does with you too, is, I enjoy a lot of other sports. I love March Madness. I'm a big hockey fan. I grew up playing hockey because I grew up near the Canadian border. But there's something about writing baseball where it breaks down very nicely at times to one-on-ones. It's the pitcher versus the hitter. It's even, the fielder versus the ball that's in flight, whatever it may be. And I think that's maybe one reason we've seen so much quality writing about baseball over the years is you can often have these really interesting scenes where time just kind of slows down and you're kind of wondering, where is that going to tease out? And that's been my infatuation with it for a long time. And I think, I'm also a big, we might get to this a little bit, but I'm also, when things don't track for me plot-wise that well, I tend to read, maybe some detective stuff, and I don't like mysteries that much, but I will read, say, Tana French and such. And often that's what it breaks down to, even if it's a conversation like we're having now, it can be a one-on-one. You think of the opening of, say, like a movie like Pulp Fiction. You just got two people sitting across the table in that Denny's, and you're not sure what's going on, but something crazy is happening. And you can ratchet it up, I think, once you kind of clear away a lot of the woods or the debris or whatever. And like I say, I love other sports, but say somebody runs around right end and goes 80 yards for a touchdown, there were so many other people involved in this, and you want to kind of give them their due, but then it becomes pretty confusing if you're talking about the pulling guard and what the tight end did and the wide receiver cracked back on some defensive back, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's like you think of Nuke Lelouch, and having the conversation, with his catcher, and
or even the conversation they're having out on the mound discussing wedding gifts.
Yeah, exactly.
That's baseball. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like my all-time favorite scene. So we did touch on the fact that your characters talk to you. Obviously, hopefully your nonfiction characters don't, but I've enjoyed both your fiction and nonfiction work. I've thought about trying to get into fiction myself and haven't taken the leap yet. But what do you enjoy and what do you find challenging about these two genres? When you sit down to work on a book.
Well, they're both challenging often at first for me. I get lost so quickly. And I think what helps me, and it's actually an idea I somewhat took from nonfiction, because kind of the template for, a lot of the writers out there will know that, kind of start with a lead and then you come down to some kind of theme statement or what's called a nut graph or whatever. And if you're doing a book, a nonfiction book, often that theme statement becomes the subtitle and such. And I have found over the years, I tend to forget sometimes, I go off on tangents when I'm writing, as you can see. And what helps me so much is when I can get that line or two down, what they call, the pitch line in New York or the log line in Hollywood. And that keeps me centered. And if anything, it's ironic because it allows me just to go out and go crazy, knowing I've got my bread trail kind of back home. I can get back to what this book's about. So it allows me to take some chances. And it's funny with Curveball way back, and in a lot of ways, Escape is an echo of this. We're messing around with it, and we didn't have that line yet. And the line ended up becoming, after a couple months, a love story set in old Havana about a pitcher who might have been. And as soon as we had that, it went up on the bulletin board, bomb, away you go. And I think in some ways, this is, again, whether you're trying to sell fiction or nonfiction, I think this is pivotal. It not only does it help you as the writer write it, but now here's a line you can give to a would-be editor or even an agent you're trying to bring on board, and they get it. And now it's something they can tell somebody else, and things take off. And it's funny because Curveball was initially turned down. Oh, that was rejected like 33 times.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, it was close to 3 years of rejection. Yeah, I can be kind of dense sometimes. I can be in denial. But once we got that line, the responses started becoming more intriguing as opposed to, what? I don't get this.
You did mention briefly before that you saw there was a question from David Rowell, of course, from the Washington Post, a friend of yours, and he'd asked, and this might be a good time to ask this, to what extent did you have to figure out what the returning characters have been up to between the two books, so that what level of information did you feel comfortable with as you went about revisiting these gentlemen?
Well, and it's also the women too,
and ladies, yeah,
and then the women take much more of a major role. In a sense, I was, sheepishly, I almost felt like I was calling my mother after not calling her for too long, and so I'm apologetic. I'm whatever, but I want to hear what's been going on in their life, and it's kind of up to me to listen for a little bit, and then as things start to play out. Especially when you're writing the book, and this is something that took me a long time to figure out. Like I say, I can be a little dense sometimes, but when your characters start to do things differently or unexpectedly, and I used to outline a lot. Now I don't outline really all that much, but when they start taking the story, just let them, because your characters, especially once you get the cart up and going up the hill, they've got a better sense of what the story maybe should be than you do. And I used to get very upset. I used to say, well, how dare they? They're doing something off script. They're supposed to do this. Knock that off. But now I just go crazy. And that's one of the fun things when you've been writing for, half a day or whatever, and you go, wow, that went a completely different direction. And that's fun.
That's cool. Well, another question I'm curious about is why we're both big fans of minor league baseball. We grew up watching it. I know you grew up going to games in Buffalo and elsewhere. And now you're writing about a grizzled old minor league catcher in Billy. Why make him a grizzled old minor league catcher in the first place? Why not have him be like an ace pitcher or a speedy outfielder or something like that?
Nah, he's got catchers are the best. You know that. I mean, they've got great insight on the game. When they're playing, they've kind of got God's view of the game right there behind home plate. Yet they pay so dearly for it, as we know. I mean, they get hit with foul tips. They sometimes get run over at the plate. They're dealing with wacko head cases. Every pitcher's different and things. They're the next Nolan Ryan or something. And I think that's one reason why so many become great managers and coaches and such. So when I was envisioning Billy, I wanted him to certainly know the game, be an absolute expert, but yet he's paying his dues. And are the dues ever going to pay off for him in a way? And so that's why he had to be a catcher. And and plus that it made sense at times that he doesn't run all that well. And so that helps in some scenes and the crowd can boo him and all this. So, but I find with catchers, even though it's almost like they're living the book of Job in a way, they often end up doing the right thing, somewhere down the line. I mean, like I said, the pitchers are, they're like Nuke LaLoosh, too full themselves, and the outfielders are looking for the next big contract. No, it's the catchers who are the real students of the game.
Well, it's like Yogi Berra. I mean, people joke about, Yogi and his crazy sayings, but, I don't remember who it was, but somebody said like, oh yeah, Yogi's so dumb. He's like, in the Hall of Fame. He's, he's a war hero. Beautiful family. Yeah, the guy's really screwed up. Win pennants in both leagues. Crazy like dumb like a fox or whatever the expression is. That's catchers in a nutshell. So the whole story of baseball in Cuba, I knew a little bit, but when I was researching the book with Louis, I really learned even more about just how tough it was for guys in the Castro years that love the game to obviously try to follow their dreams. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like for ball players in the 60s, 70s, mostly 60s, I'm thinking, but, guys in that era of Billy, and a little after to try to make it in the game?
Oh, sure. I mean, the choices, I think, are so profound. I don't think at times we can quite imagine it. I remember one time having a conversation with Omar Linares, who's probably the best player who didn't defect in recent memory. I mean, a third baseman who could field like Brooks Robinson and probably hit with more power, but he didn't want to leave his family. And so therefore that was, if you left, you weren't quite sure when you were ever going to see your family again. If your family was going to potentially be thrown in prison, lose their house, etc. Yeah. And so that's really difficult. And I think the other thing we didn't quite understand, it took me a long time to figure it out too, was, it's one thing to jump to the major leagues and make a lot of money. And somehow we think of that a lot. But I don't think that was front and center with them a lot of the times. In a lot of ways, you're talking about, guys like Louis, Tony Oliva, etc. Part of that decision is not so much money driven, but part of it is I want to play against the best. I want to see if I'm one of the best. How do I stack up? And we are so fortunate in this country. I mean, if you want to, be an investment banker, knock yourself out, go to Wall Street. You want to write a screenplay. Okay, there's Hollywood, 3 time zones away. And you can go toe to toe and see how you can match up. For a lot of the Cuban ball players, that's not the case. And so therefore, I think in some ways they were driven by this unanswered question of their ability as much as they were about maybe big contracts and things like that. And the danger aspect is, Sal, as you well know, we've talked about it, in 60s, 70s, you look at somebody like El Duque, gets out on a raft. I mean, the way Louis got out, it's always, it's dangerous. And today it's dangerous too, but in a different way. And that's what rocked me on this last trip down in 2017 is, okay, maybe the best ball players aren't getting out like El Duque on a raft right now, but they're having to make deals with really unsavory, dangerous characters with crime syndicates. And we've seen that with Puig and others. Wow. And then you're really, probably endangering your family potentially. So it's tough any way you cut it.
Yeah, it's like the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. So speaking of Cubans that play the game, both your novels explore the possibilities of Fidel Castro being good enough as a pitcher to sign with a big league club, and also how that might have changed the world if he had chosen baseball over, revolutionary acts. A lot of people have especially in Saber, people downplay Castro's baseball skills, but I don't really think that's that important in the making of a novel. I mean, you're talking about an alternate reality, so it's okay if he wasn't quite as good as he appears to be in the book. But his affinities and his abilities in the game, well, you did touch on this before. He really knew how to use baseball as a way to kind of win over the people, and that's kind of one of his.
Very much so.
Yeah,
and I think in a way, he was the de facto general manager of this hugely successful national Olympic baseball team for decades. I mean, he was the one who set up the roster. He was the one figuring, if I put him on the roster, will he defect, if he goes to the Olympics, etc. But if you dial it back even farther, and I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Castro was major league talent, but when he was leaving high school, again, from the eastern end of the island, he was kind of a hick coming to the big city, coming to Havana. He would have been considered, at least athletically, a blue chip prospect. He was pretty good in baseball, pretty good in basketball, etc. And we do know that there was this period of time in his early 20s where he's kind of deciding, am I going to go political, be a law student, or, am I going to chase, in essence, his first love, which was baseball? And again, you kind of go how far down the road that goes. But I had never considered that until that first trip to Havana and Holguin in 1991, where I had Cubans telling me about, yeah, Castro, he loves baseball. He maybe could have signed, and then you start thinking out, going, boy, this, as you say, it would have been a lot different world if we'd signed him to somebody, signed him to like a minor league contract for Great Falls, Montana.
Just get him out of there.
Yeah, that's right. There's no Cuban Missile Crisis. There's none of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways he would have taken it. And, I don't want to go too far down the political thing, but the guy was born, unfortunately, under a lucky star, because you look at, the way he returns to the island from Mexico, 55, 56, and pretty much Batista's waiting for him. And yet somehow Raul, Che, unfortunately, all escape. And 3 years later, they've taken control of the island. So if some cat like that wants to say, yeah, I want to pursue baseball, maybe I'm not going to sell him too short.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if he had the drive and the luck to make it in politics as he did, maybe he would have had that same luck to be one of these guys who, pushes himself past the the level of his talent to make it to the next level as a ball player too.
Yeah, very much. And I think, just to not belabor too much Castro, but he loved the game. He formed his own team when he was a kid. He had his dad buy him uniforms. The only criteria was, if you were on Castro's youth team, Castro always pitched. You had to find another position. So, there was always a quid pro quo.
Well, if you don't mind, I thought this would be a good time to ask you to, read a little bit from Escape from Castro's Cuba. So we've got this vision of what things look like in the city of Columns, and maybe you could paint a wider picture for us with some words.
Yeah, I'd love to. This is, and again, you can tell Havana got under my skin. And so one of the things I love writing about is Havana. You don't need much setup here. It's Billy is with his friend Chuck Cochran and his daughter Yvonne, and they are outside the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Monterey, and they're waiting to see if this kid they're hoping is going to defect comes down. And they're killing time. And in doing so, Chuck, who's roughly the same age as Billy, also played baseball way back at the famous Winter Ball League with Billy, is just talking about Havana in the old days. Somehow, from that small alleyway, I could still see all the way down to the water, the lights atop the Hotel Nacional. That's where we often ended up. There was always time for a nightcap in Havana, right, Billy? Even if we were playing a doubleheader the next day. Always time for a nightcap, I agreed. And you know what I remember the most, Chuck said? It's the smell of the sea. Even well off the Malecon breakwater, farther inland, even near the old Cologne Cemetery, you always knew you were close to the ocean in Havana. No matter how much it was built up, I mean heap upon heap of mafia money and neon glow and big band music and foolish laughter, so many people carrying on. Through it all, the sea was always out there. It always seemed like it was only a few blocks away. I believe that's what made the town feel so full of ghosts. The sea breeze was always coming off the Florida Straits, holding everything so close to the heart. Everything Chuck had said was as true as anything can be. Closing my eyes, I was back there, walking along the Malecon breakwater in Havana at dusk. Once again, Melina Fonseca was on my arm as we gazed upon the dark expanse of water. How far, Melina would say. It was a question she loved to ask, even though she knew the answer as well as I did. 90 miles from Havana to the Florida Keys, I'd reply. Only 90 miles, she would repeat, as if it was the most important number in the whole world. And to think we're almost there. Then she would smile, a sight that I'll never forget. Papa, Yvonne said, someone is out front.
Wow. Thank you. That was beautiful. And the 90 miles, I remember Louis speaking of the 90 miles so often, talking about his own journey and how, his family, he's 46 years he went between seeing his extended family and seeing his beloved island, 90 miles away.
And the old tourist motto is almost, beyond ironic. It's almost cruel, what they used to have on the night ferry there, so close and yet so far, and that's what Louis went through.
So there's another question that we got that I think is good to ask here. Is about the research. This is Doug Shirk, mentions about the research into the cigarette boat scenes and the escape from Mexico. But I don't know, he said, is there any personal experiences you can reveal? But I'm just curious, obviously going to Cuba is the best thing you can do for research. But, when you're thinking about scenes that you might have not witnessed yourself and not experienced yourself, how do you go about doing that?
I think reconstructing scenes is, whether you're doing fiction or nonfiction, the most difficult thing, because in a perfect world, we'd be there. We'd be witness of every feature scene we need. But of course, it doesn't happen that way. And one of the things I learned from one of my teachers, Alan Shoes, who unfortunately died just a couple of years ago, but I took a workshop from him at Johns Hopkins when I was doing my grad work. And I didn't realize it, but Alan had gotten his PhD in Caribbean literature. So he was like loaning me books, etc. And he kept talking about this book, this small coffee table book. He didn't have it anymore. And it was black and white photographs of Havana, roughly early 50s. And he said, you've got to get a hold of this, because, you visited Cuba, but there's more that needs to be done in terms of setting. And he used to ask the question, the way setting and locale could be pivotal. Is it a demon or is it a saint? Is it an angel or is it, something disastrous? And that's how you can personify setting and scene. And I'd been there. And by that point, I've been there twice, but still I couldn't hop on a plane and go back and really tease it out. So I ended up finding that book that Alan suggested at the Library of Congress. I made a couple Xeroxes of what I felt was the best stuff. And then I made a second set, just to give to him, almost as a laugh a little bit. And after class, I gave it to him like the next week. And I started to leave. He goes, hang on a minute. I'm going, what? And he goes, well, here you go. Okay, you got that scene on the waterfront. Okay, here's a couple photographs. You've got copies of them. Okay, you're ready to get going on it. And I didn't get it right away. I went, Alan, what are you trying to tell me? And he said, you're going to write this scene in the next couple of days, and you're going to take these copies of these photographs, you're going to put them up on your wall, and Melina and Billy are going to be walking along, and you're going to be able to say, there's that store, and next to it is this store, and overhead the sky's like this. And it's funny, ever since then, I use photographs a lot. And that's the great thing I think about our iPhones these days too, is you can, just take some photos and then just look at your phone, and then you can start to describe it. I mean, we see, would-be artists all the time, especially, we'll see them after COVID, back in the museums, and they're sketching. They're copying the masters or something, in essence.
Yeah, no, my son's a photography major at NYU, and unfortunately he's in class in his bedroom these days. But when he's in the city, the stuff he captures just walking around with his camera. And, it works for nonfiction too. Sure. It's, and you talk about looking at that book from the 50s. You can go to Cuba as much as you want, but you're not gonna be able to go to Cuba in the 50s, right? Yeah. So you need that book to set the scenes in some ways for if you're describing something that happened in the far past. Now there's another question that came in, and then I'll get to my last question, but this is from Bobby and Cindy. I guess it's the Brady Bunch down in Knoxville. You spoke about having the line and the freedom to write or skate around that line. In music, I think it's called the hook, the thing that grabs you. How does a line come to you? Does it just jump to mind like it happens with Bob Dylan? That's not too tough a level to reach. Or is it a labor of love over time, like a Leonard Cohen? How is it for you? Maybe it's in those photographs.
Yeah, I think you're trying to find it in the photographs. And I wish it came as fast as Dylan. I mean, God knows Dylan's written songs he's forgotten, but I think you just try to, distill it down, and I like batting it off a couple people. My wife Jackie's great. I love throwing some lines by her. That in my mind is the quality of working with a good editor, because they will often go, "Oh, we got it, but not quite." And I think Bob and Cynthia are absolutely right. It's very much like the hook in music. It's what's the thing you're still remembering, maybe even a couple weeks after you've put down the book or haven't heard the song in a while. One of the best conversations I had once was with a Hollywood producer, and he was like looking at some of the Cuba stuff and etc. And he said, "Keep giving me big scenes. I need scenes." And what he meant by that was scenes that people still are thinking about weeks away. And you think about it, that's the book, that's the film, that's the song that's still resonating. You can't get out of your head, because somewhere there, and maybe there's been problems with it, it's been up and down, but somewhere there's a key scene or two, or even a line that you can't forget. And I don't want to belabor it too much, one of my favorite movies is Chinatown. And the way Robert Towne wrote that is every scene in that movie builds to one line. And some of the lines are somewhat pedestrian. It's like, LA's a desert community. Oh, well, that's no big deal. That's kind of in the third or fourth scene. But then once you realize that, oh, it's a desert community. What's the most precious thing in a desert? It's water. What will men do for water? Then they will lie, cheat, steal, kill. And so they go, oh, I'm seeing this in a different way.
So you're building on each of those lines and scenes until you get to forget about it.
Yeah, very much.
So I lied. I actually have two more questions, but and then we can get to a few others from other people. So, obviously we love baseball, but a lot of people think baseball is in trouble in America, and is dying. It's an international game more than ever in the major leagues. I mean, if you look at, the number of people from Dominican, and of course, Cubans are still in there, and Asians, and, but Americans, not as much as they used to be, especially African-Americans. The number of black ball players, U.S. born black ball players is really way down. Do you think baseball is in trouble, and what can be done to save it?
I think it's listing, Saul, and this season worries me in some ways. In some ways, I'm heartened that, COVID seems to be receding, hopefully a bit, more people getting vaccinated. Looks like we'll have much more of a full schedule, which I think we need. Something continues through the summer. But I covered, back when I was at USA Today and Baseball Weekly, I covered the labor debacle in 93, 94. I was one of the lead labor guys. And granted, I'm not on the beat on it, so I take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. But I'm hearing the same type of saber rattling, the same type of shots across the bow between the players and the owners. And I really, really hope we have a season not only that's exciting on the field, but gets these two somewhat divergent groups kind of together. We're in bad need of a kumbaya moment when it comes to labor and baseball.
Yeah, that doesn't involve steroids.
Yeah, it doesn't involve steroids.
We need a 90s. We need a 98, but that's real. Because I think you're right. I mean, we need a whole summer of baseball, but then come December, we don't need there's to be a major labor breakdown.
Yeah. I think the best scenario is we have a great season, and as the World Series begins, or even as it ends, Commissioner Manfred, awards the trophy and just says something effective. And we've got a new collective bargaining agreement that's going for the next, pick number 5, 6, 7 years. And that would be awesome, because when we go into another off season with these two sides kind of entrenched in their camps, we're in trouble.
Yeah. So let's return back to the fictional baseball world for my last question. And then we'll see what else we got coming in here. So I think a lot of people like myself will finish Escape from Castro's Cuba and wonder, okay, what's next for Billy and the crew? Will there be a third book? Putting you on the spot here. Are you going to play another season?
I hadn't, when I was doing Escape, I wasn't thinking about that. But some folks like you and others have raised it. And I must admit, I'm beginning to think yes. And I think what could be fun, Billy's getting kind of long in the tooth, so he's going to need some help. And one of the things I love, in the book is how the growth of especially the women characters, Evangelina, Cassie, his two daughters, even Kate Sinclair. And maybe there's a way to go with that. So maybe I've got to talk to some more women, which is great. I love talking to women.
No, I mean, that was one of the things I enjoyed the most, because I have a daughter who's 16, and and we're our relationship is changing matter of fact, she literally, while we're in this conversation, just went on her first drive by herself. She got her license yesterday.
And you're here? You're crazy.
Yeah, she's like, following. I go drive. I'm like, I'm about to do an interview. Okay. So I'm like, I was like,
text me later, make sure she came back.
But, we're at a different stage in our relationship, and she's becoming a woman, and it's kind of that I felt that with of course, the women in Escape are older, but still that father-daughter relationship, that I really enjoyed that. So I do hope that we get to see more of it.
Well, and it's funny you raise that, because even when I was doing the second one, Escape, one of the first people I reached out to was Daniel Silva, who has blurbed this along with Louis and Jane Levy, bless their hearts. And of course, everybody knows Daniel's stuff, his thrillers with Gabriel Alon, and Gabriel just keeps going and going. And I got a hold of Daniel and said, I think I'm going to bring back this guy I haven't really written about in close to 20 years. And Daniel, his knee-jerk reaction was, do it, go. I was like, okay, let's have fun. So it was
like a Harry Bosch, never gets too old, right?
Hopefully Billy Bride doesn't get too old.
That's great. I forgot to ask you about Louis, because he's somebody we both, I know, love. I was lucky enough to write a book with him. You had a wonderful testimonial on the back cover of Escape from Louis. I know he loved Castro's Curveball. I don't know what you got a Louis Tiant memory to share with me?
Oh, I think it was his documentary in DC, and all these people. As it's a great documentary. Your book is awesome, and I highly recommend Son of Havana. And he just getting dogpiled after that screening somewhere in downtown DC, and he got a hold of me and a couple other guys, and just said, "Quick, I need a little bit of." I need a respite here. He didn't say respite. I need a break. And so we went out on the sidewalk in this beautiful DC night, and we're just talking with him, and he kind of lights up a cigar, and he's just puffing on it. And you can just see him, okay, I can go back in now. Thank you, guys. And we went in. I felt like I was part of Louis Tiant's posse for a night. And that was really kind of fun.
That contented look. I love that. Yeah. But he is one of these guys that, wherever he goes, I mean, obviously he's very recognizable. Sure. It's funny, the guy in Gonzaga, I can't remember his name, but he's got the Fu Manchu. And, I'm like, oh, and it's like, you remember him because of that. And Louis is aging great, which is funny because people always thought he lied about his age and that he was older. Now he's really 80 and he looks like he's 65. I mean,
he looks great.
Incredible. But he's like just wherever he goes, the people come up to him and he's always so natural. And you can really tell he's the real deal. It's just, that's why he belongs in the Hall of Fame, among other reasons. But we're not gonna get into that. But I appreciate here we are, Son of Havana. You gotta read that.
Great book.
It's Louis Tiant's story is absolutely incredible on and off the field. I am gonna ask another question that we got in here. Oh, interesting. This was okay. So I'm not going to give away the book, but this question from Donna and Bill Breskin. Tim, can you ever go back to Cuba after addressing the slavery elements that you described in Escape?
I hope so. And that would mean Cuba's changed a little bit too. It's funny because I thought I'd worn out my welcome even after Curveball, because somebody had given Castro a copy of that And I went, oh, great. But
He said Ricky.
yeah, it was Ricky. I think I would love to go back again because, again, there's something about Havana, you get the politics out of the way. I love walking around Havana at dusk, early in the morning, because parts of it, are falling to pieces. But in the shadows, in kind of the gray zone, so to speak, and dusk, you can see how beautiful the city was and how far it dates back. I mean, these beautiful boulevards with the royal palm trees down the middle. And I love the people. On that first trip, I ran into so many wild people on that first trip in 91. And I was walking around Old Town in Havana, and this woman came up to me, older woman, and she said, "You're American." And I went, "Well, I can't lie. Okay, I'm American." And then she insisted on telling me we never trusted the Russians. And I was like, "Okay, why is that?" And she said, "We dance so much better," and all this. And she kind of followed me for a half hour just trying to make this point. I said, "I believe you. I believe you." So, I don't know. The Cuban people are so resilient and are so proud. And frankly, on whatever side of the Straits of Florida you're talking about, I think they deserve better, because what's happened at times to their families and to their culture is just unbelievable.
Well, tell you what, if you do go back, can I hitch a ride?
Oh yeah, well, fun.
I mean, maybe I'll bring Louis too. I mean, I've never been. I kind of feel a little bit like I've been through Louis, but I'd love to get there. I mean, my in-laws have been there, and a lot of other people that I know, but I've never made the trip myself. And it would be wonderful to see it through your eyes.
Yeah, if I get in trouble, you can bail me out.
Sure. Yeah, I'll call Ricky.
They'll call Ricky.
So, Christina, I don't know if we have any other questions that maybe you see that I don't see here, or if you have any.
No, that's it. Ricky is going to be waiting for all of us.
No. We're getting on your boat, Christina. We're getting away from Ricky.
So this was just a wonderful, just delightful conversation. Thank you so much. I think you got to all of the questions from the audience. So thank you. I'm so glad you brought up Alan Shoes. Somebody that we all really loved and admired greatly. His daughter is a publicist at Echo for HarperCollins. So
really?
and we work with her a lot. But anyway,
introduce me. I am trying to sell the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. I was thinking as you were talking that maybe you should join forces for the next book. Join forces with someone, Tim. Seriously. And the first person that I thought of, for whatever weird reason, was Nelson DeMille, because he's written some books. He really loves Cuba. So maybe just, even reaching out and always like having an exchange is.
Well, get us together. I'm more than happy.
I will. So
I'll tell you, I was listening, and the way Tim was describing the fiction, process, it got me a little more jazzed up, because right now my newest project actually is a non-sports book. It's kind of an American history, about an event in American history. I won't go longer than that, but and
do it.
And people were saying to me, should you do fiction or nonfiction? I mean, obviously nonfiction is what I know, but fiction, there's a lot to be said for making a great romantic or whatever mystery story.
Now is the time. Why not? We're doing a workshop that's coming up. You might want to look. Elizabeth George is teaching a workshop on writing the novel. It's during the day. It's coming up in mid-April, maybe April 14th or so. Why don't you just, take it and see if it's inspiring in any way. Absolutely.
Might take you up on that. Thanks.
Absolutely.
And I got to get down to the store too, because many people have told me, it's a wonderful place down there, and I could go visit my in-laws, and
it is definitely
worth
seeing. It's such a beautiful, beautiful place. So I hope we're going to see both of you in person there soon. Things are opening up a lot, and everyone's getting vaccinated, and hopefully sometime maybe, around the 4th of July, we'll start, seeing some maybe in-person events, and we're still looking forward to the book fair in late November and
Mhm.
thinking that perhaps it'll be a hybrid, some events in person, some events virtually, and we'll see. But anyway, I learned so much about baseball, and it's just wonderful. And I, wish you the best of luck with this book. Very happy to have it at Books and Books. I'll just remind everyone that's watching that you can order it, by just pressing the green button, and we'll ship it right out to you. If you're in Miami and you want to stop by one of our stores, you can do that as well. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you for being with us in our little virtual bookshop. And I hope we'll see each other soon.
Thank you, Christina. Sal,
Yeah,
great
thank you
job.
so much.
Great catching up with you, buddy.
Muchas
you too.
gracias.
Go
Muchas
Orange
gracias.
next year.
Next year in
All right.
Havana.
Thanks, everybody. See you next year in Havana or Syracuse.
Hasta luego.
All right.
Hasta mañana.